name is Lisa Wright. Linda asked me to say a few words about Helen and David Slottje. I'm living now in Virginia, but I was in New York for several years with Helen and David. When the grassroots were forming in opposition to natural gas development of the Marcellus Shale. And so I can say I knew Helen and David before they were cool.
We were always
before we were really good. Before they were famous. So I met Helen actually in the spring, I think, of 2009.
Yep.
And it was clear behind that sweet face was a woman of fierce determination and intelligence, disarming wit and charm. She learned landowners had been signing gas leases they didn't understand. And by the fall, Helen was speaking publicly on New York State regulatory issues and pipelines. The Slottjes soon became pioneers of the argument that towns can use zoning and land use laws to prohibit gas drilling. And their commitment to this cause goes beyond environmental concerns. They have fought tirelessly for the rights of individuals and communities to be well informed and have instructed them on how to use the legal system to protect themselves. As Helen herself put it, we couldn't regulate the industry, but we could tell them they couldn't be here at all. So this summer, the New York Court of Appeals ruled that towns can use local zoning laws to prohibit oil and gas production within their borders. The Slottjes are not just environmental heroes, but heroes for the democratic process and champions for the will of the people. They remind us that people who organize can get results. So without further ado, Helen Slottje.
Well, thank you. I'm going to have to take you around with me. Well, thank you all for coming out here. Thanks to Lisa. Lisa was really actually instrumental in getting us involved with this and teaching us how to be activists, because I had no idea. This wasn't my background, it wasn't David's background. We've come over from the other side. Let's just put it that way. And so we needed a guide, and Lisa was just that guide. So you are very lucky, and I feel very honored to be able to come back and return the favor for Lisa. She came to New York and taught us, and come to Virginia and support her in what she's doing. So it's a beautiful night, and it's August, and you're in a library. So thank you for that. You're all very good sports. So we're going to talk about sort of what's going on here in Virginia. I thought I'd just start quickly with where we were in New York. As Lisa said, when we started in 2009, they told us fracking's coming, there's nothing you can do, it's inevitable, get used to it. And that was everybody, from industry to our Department of Environmental Conservation to even the big environmental groups that just didn't want to fight that fight. And we said, no, we think even though we can't regulate the industry, we can use land use laws to say no. And we traveled all over the state, and there's now almost 200 towns that have passed one form of a law or another. So, and this has really led the way in spreading this, especially with our recent, the Court of Appeals is the highest court in New York. So this legal battle's been going on for 3 years. And now our highest court has unequivocally said that industry was wrong. Towns did have this ability to totally prohibit the industry from their borders, even though they cannot regulate the processes of that industry. So that's really helped spur some of the anti-fractivists who have felt hopeless and, believe some of this industry nonsense that there's nothing you can do, just get used to it. So that's where we started. So just to briefly set the stage here, so we're talking generally about unconventional gas drilling. And because we've finished doing all of the conventional drilling, finding a pool and just sticking a straw in it and having the gas come up, we've done most of that. So we're trying to find new ways of getting fossil fuels to burn, because that's the smart thing to do. And so we've come up with this way to drill down vertically like we usually do, turn the bit, and travel through shale formations horizontally. And that makes a big enough pay zone to try to blast gas out of solid rock. This isn't small pools. This isn't loosely associated sandstone. This is solid slate rock like you see. And the gas is literally, you can only see it with an electron microscope. That's the gas we're going after. And so, and that's obviously a much different process than our original process of just putting a straw down into this conventional sort of pool of freely moving gas. And so that's caused a lot of questions. So fracking, since it's solid rock, they have to be able to blast it apart thousands of feet underground, which is under tremendous pressure. So they have to create even more pressure to get the water and the proppants and these various chemicals down there to shatter the rock. So they have to turn the water into jelly because there would be too much friction if they didn't put enough chemicals in it to basically create a slurry. And that slurry has biocides and other chemical constituents of which we're told we don't need to know really what they are. That's above our pay grade. And they pump this whole cocktail underground, blast open the rock, and then leave these little silica sand, which is its own whole other problem, but leave little bits of silica sand in the rock to allow the gas to flow back and through the well. And so this is obvious. It's a very intensive practice. It requires bringing in lots of water, lots of chemicals. It's all open air industry, lots of emissions and the like, and those are some of the concerns that people have. So here in Virginia, there are three general topics that I was told are of some interest to you. So the first being the Cove Point Dominion LNG export facility. The second being the George Washington National Forest and proposed fracking in the forest. And the Taylorsville. David was in Oklahoma, I'm thinking Titusville. So the Taylorsville play out on the coastal plains. So those are the three sort of general things that I thought we might talk about. So the Cove Point LNG export facility is a $4 billion investment. So when you think about people talking about a bridge and a temporary solution, we're spending $4 billion on one facility that they have signed contracts going 20 years out. Right off the bat, that every output of that plant has been promised for 20 years, full capacity. So this is not some sort of temporary, small project designed to sort of get us over a hump. And they'll also tell you that, well, we're not even in charge of getting the gas. We're worried about more pipelines. Our customers are solely responsible for purchasing the gas, getting pipeline contracts to transport that gas, and we are just a tolling facility. It sort of comes in, it spends time here, and it goes out. We never own that gas. So on the one hand, they talk about, and again, so you have these companies, and these are foreign companies, India and Japan, buying natural gas production here in the States, shipping it through pipelines that they're using eminent domain and the like to scare people into signing, to ship this all overseas, because they want energy security. And furthermore, while the Marcellus shale has not been especially lucrative because it is so-called dry gas, the more profitable gas these days is wet gas or shale oils, because these different propane and butane and some of the other fractions that they find in natural gas are much more profitable than methane gas. So they have these basically cracker facilities and are able to produce plastics, feedstocks and the like. So that's really where the money has been. So gas drilling rigs have generally left Pennsylvania, gone to Ohio, North Dakota and the like, and really slowed down in the Marcellus because this dry gas is not as profitable. It If all you want to do is put gas into a pipeline and ship it overseas, dry gas is exactly what you want. So while they say this isn't going to increase demand or change the economics of natural gas, because this is just a sliver of the global energy markets, it's directly, they're putting it here to be close to the Marcellus, to have low shipping costs for their customers to get it from point A to them. And there aren't any fractionalization facilities in the middle of that stream. So they want dry gas. So this will create a new market for Marcellus and other dry gases that is presently not there. So that's another interesting thing. So one of the reasons why we hear we need to engage in this whole shale gas revolution is for energy independence, despite the fact that we're shipping this gas overseas in the global market. So you might ask, I could tell you that I think that energy independence is a hoax and a fallacy and we're never going to get there. But why have me tell you when Rex Tillerson can tell you? And Rex Tillerson is a smart guy. He runs a company bigger than many countries, every single state we have, and employs hundreds of thousands of people. So he believes that energy is a global market. You have to be involved in the global market. Prices are set on the global market, and this idea that you are ever going to be out of that international energy market is just wrong. So really what this energy independence is it's a charade masquerading as an energy policy. And this is we're no closer to energy independence, let alone energy security, than we were when Richard Nixon declared this to be a goal in 1973, which incidentally is the year that the LNG facility was built as an import facility. So Rex Tillerson had a little bit more to say, and here he's talking about how we're never going, we're never going to not need these oil and gas imports. So which leads you to start to think about all of the value that is embedded in stock prices of companies like ExxonMobil, which are based on their reserves, the carbon and fossil fuels that they have under lease and have plans to develop. That's basically, you might mortgage your house, or if your house puts shares of, stock of your house, look at what your house is worth, and, stock market's not quite like that. You might get way more than your house was worth. But you would generally, the concept of stock is that it's going to reflect the value of the company, the assets. So here, the value of all of these big fossil fuel companies is based in reserves that have been capitalized and are in the market. So that money, it's basically money that's already been spent. If we don't extract all of the gas that they have and we strand it underground, somebody has to pay for that in the form of losses because we've overvalued these companies. So if we want to try to eliminate some of the risks of tremendous climate change, estimates are we need to leave somewhere between 60 to 80% of known reserves right now underground. So going out and creating new infrastructure, new projects, spending billions of dollars, going down the path that we've agreed we have to stop going down, makes it incredibly difficult to achieve our climate change goals. So that's sort of that. So when they talk about exporting natural gas, in fact, what this really is about, and we see bits and pieces of this in the national press, we're really using exporting gas as a political policy. And in fact, Hillary Clinton and as in the State Department created a Bureau of Energy Resources, and their goal, her words, not mine, is for the purpose of channeling the domestic energy boom into a geopolitical tool. So our idea is to try to use this fracked gas to assert power over other players in the international sphere, to get involved with Russia and the Ukraine, to use this as a tool against China by supporting, in this case, with the Dominion Cove project, India and Japan as a counterbalance to Russia and China. And this idea, again, we know we can't be continuing down this path, that while we may not have known the problems with fossil fuel when we started, and it's nobody's fault that we sort of, originally started down this path, we now know it's wrong, and that it's morally wrong to ruin our habitat in the name of money and to leave nothing for our children. So, but instead, we're trying to turn this destruction of our local resources and landscapes to go out and protect our interests abroad. And really, what are our interests abroad? Those are the interests of the big fuel companies, fossil fuel companies, that we want to protect and keep this whole sort of market of theirs going. So it's a very negative feedback loop where we're just, we're ripping apart the country, we're exporting it, we're trying to use that as a tool, we're getting, further involved with trying to influence other countries to also develop shale technology, and going, again, just speeding down a path that is, we know to be extremely dangerous. So those are some of the concerns with the LNG facility in Maryland. Unfortunately, our regulatory process with FERC and many state agencies, they are not designed to stop projects. FERC is a permit issuing agency. They never saw an infrastructure project they didn't like. That's their job, is to approve projects and to build infrastructure, because infrastructure is good. So, as with so many things, the strategy to stop this code point as it marches from approval to approval to approval is really going to be people protesting in the streets, demanding that this not proceed, and we're not going to take it anymore. Trying to fight. This is one of those projects that has so much momentum. Everyone's behind it. The State Department's behind it. The president of Dominion actually went in front of Congress at the end of this past May, to testify. I'm not an expert on politics and international politics, but yeah, this is exactly what you guys have said you wanted, and it is. So it's going to be really hard to derail using any sort of traditional legal tools and trying to get a seat at the regulatory table and playing by the rules that are in place. The rules that are in place are designed to have this project proceed whether we want it or not. So, and we also hear that, well, this is really good because, even if we're building out this natural gas, we have more and more gas out there, it's better than coal. The problem is we're not leaving the coal in the ground. If we were going to take the gas and leave the coal in the ground, that may or may not be a smart plan, but we are not doing that because the energy companies are looking. ExxonMobil in the past couple of years has talked, they need to create more demand. They want more demand. They want us to burn more fossil fuels. That's how they make money. So, and the coal, people who mine coal, that's how they make money. They're not going to stop just because natural gas might be better for the environment if nobody makes them stop, and nobody's making them stop. So coal exports are just going through the roof as we use more gas here at home. We're sending all that coal over to China where it's getting burned, and if it wasn't China, it'd be somewhere else. So all of the typical arguments are really just political cover that sound good, that, who doesn't want energy independence? That sounds American. Energy security, making the world safe for democracy, helping with climate change. None of those things are accomplished by these projects. So that's the happy news on the LNG facility. I do end on a good note, but
Do you want us to ask questions now about the cohort or save it to
maybe
the end?
just at the end, just so I can get
Okay.
through this, because I can probably just to get to, I'll stay as long as you want answering as many questions, but just to get as many people to hear as much as we can, but thank you for asking. So next up is the George Washington National Forest. If we're going to be, all American, and why don't we frack that too? So the George Washington National Forest is over 1 million acres, 140 miles. Most of it is here in Virginia, and some of it, a smaller portion, is in West Virginia. And it's administered by the USDA, which might be a surprise. The Forest Service is part of the Department of Agriculture. Because unlike our national parks, which are supposed to be preserved and conserved, the national forests were originally designed in 1911 to provide a continuing source of timber. And the goal was not, they want, in a sustainable way, a planned way, so we wouldn't do clear cutting anymore. But the idea was, and you'll see when you go into these national forests, a land of many uses, or the land of many uses. And that's their mission, actually, of the Forest Department, is to basically give away our national resources at low or no cost to companies so that they can make lots of money and improve our economy. So in doing that, what the U.S. Forest Service has said is we're going to have basically 3 tiers of regulation. We're going to have this big national plan. We're going to have smaller, what's the second tier? Oh, so there's the big national plan, then there are these land unit management plans for any individual forest. And then there are actual plans, for any particular timber sale or gas lease. But you start at the top with these big national rules. And then the unit plan is basically like a zoning ordinance for the forest, where we're going to cut timber here, we're going to leave this part alone, this is going to be roadless. And in 2000, the USDA decided it was going to streamline the regulatory process. Read gut. And so they were sued, and those rules were suspended and thrown out as being improper, because they decided they didn't need to do any sort of environmental review. So here in the George Washington National Forest, you've got it's the rivershed for the Potomac River and the James River, supplying water to 4.5 million people and dumping into the Chesapeake Bay. So the last one of these second-tier forest management plans was prepared for the George Washington National Forest in 1993. And they're supposed to be 10 to 15-year plans. So in 2007, they started work on this plan, and at that point in time, it was they followed these new streamlined rules and basically didn't tell anybody anything and came up with their own plan. So when the groups challenged the very top level regulations and got those regulations thrown out, all the work that the Forest Service had done under those regulations got thrown out, so they had to start over again. So they started over in 2010. And they said, fine, we'll have a public hearing, we'll let the people talk. And what did they do? They went out and came out with the very same recommendations that they had come up with under the streamlined plan. People took them to court and they said, you can't just say you had a process when you clearly didn't have a process. And so they had to start over again. And so in 2011, they came up with their new draft plan in sort of early 2011. And comments could be made on that plan through the end of 2011. And the very first iteration of the plan did not provide for any hydraulic fracturing in the forest. But industry complained, because we all know how great fracking is. We certainly want to do it in the national forest, and Forest Service, being good little sellers of products to businesses, said, okay, that sounds reasonable. So they then came up with these various alternatives. One being the option A, the no action alternative, which was to allow. Sounds, oh good, no, like you're not going to permit anything. No, the no action thing is you can do anything you want in the forest. So that's industry's preferred option. And then there are other options that vary from allowing drilling in anywhere from 900 to 600,000 acres of the million-acre forest. So a huge percentage. And so all of you, and the Sierra Club was one of the groups, looks like about 100,000 comments were received by the Forest Service. And one thing we have learned in New York, and it's true with the EPA and the Forest Service, the more comments they get, the more time they have to spend shifting through these comments and explaining why they're going to disregard them. It takes time, especially when people send in, and what we suggested in New York is handwrite your comments and mail them in. They can't scan them, they can't, just because they do. In New York, they set up a whole where they could just basically, you had to fill out your comments. You didn't have to, but they had a whole process where they made it very easy. You could do your comments online, and you picked the box that your comment fell into, and then you made your little comment so that they could just turn around and say, oh look, all of these are in this group, and these all look the same, and here's our answer. So they are still, since the end of 2011, have been sifting through these comments with no idea when they're going to ultimately release this plan. So when that plan ultimately gets released, there will be an opportunity to sue again, depending on whether their actions are reasonable or not. There's some ability now, I have no idea how one does it, to try to influence the Forest Service to go the right way on this. So if any of you know people in the Forest Service, this would be an opportunity to try to find out what's going on there. But that's the sort of general, so we're waiting there. And they do have, unfortunately, for national forests versus these national parks, it's very difficult. The government really believes that it has a mandate to allow development in areas that are wholly unsuitable for development at this point. This is just a tremendous migratory area, carbon sink, all of those things, and tearing that up for more fossil fuel development seems a bit absurd. But so the forest plan it's out there. There's not a lot, as far as I could tell, happening on the ground right now. We're just waiting for the Forest Service. But it is something clearly to keep an eye on, and for groups like the Sierra Club, you like to challenge when presumably they come out and say, oh, this sounds great. So, and here's so it is the Marcellus Shale that is in the forest, and so you can see this map. The Marcellus Shale is like the hashtags, and the green is forest area, and so a huge percentage of the forest does underlie the Marcellus Shale, and close enough to West Virginia that these are areas that in West Virginia have been drilled to a great extent. So that takes us to Titusville. I know. Now
That's where I'm coming from. Northern Jack. I drove 90 miles to come here.
So this is when I first saw Northern Neck, I was like, how am I going to find out what that is? But
can you talk about how the laws, you were saying the laws here in Virginia are slightly more favorable for regulation at the city or the county level than they are in New York?
So in New York, we cannot regulate the industry. Here in Pennsylvania, and places like Pennsylvania, you can't regulate it, and you're generally they've tried to take zoning away. In Virginia, there's none of that. There's no. It would appear that towns, well, you don't have town level here; it's county and cities, but that you can pass zoning ordinances, land use ordinances that decide what the appropriate land uses are. And you can say we don't want, gas drilling wells, we don't want high intensity fracked wells and things like that. So yes.
I think that's sort of in question. There's the Virginia Gas and Oil Act, and Cuccinelli, who was the Attorney General, had interpreted that to say that the oil and gas companies have preemption, or they can do what they want. Counties can only affect where the siting is. But I think most lawyers agree that this is something worth debating.
That's what they told us in New York too. That you don't have any, this, you're preempted. This is what it is, and so generally it would appear, and there have been counties in Virginia that have sought to act, ultimately decided not to, but believed and operated as if they had the power to make these zoning type decisions. So while you can't, tell them, you want more than the $25,000 bond that they have to post with the state and things like that, but to look and say, here's our land use, we've got this, that, and the other thing in our town. We don't have a heavy industrial zone. We don't even have a light industrial zone, or we do have a light industrial zone, but this is heavy industry, and this is just not a permitted use. And there seem to be Virginia lawyers that we have talked with that believe that counties and cities have this power in New York, or in Virginia, like New York. So it's just a matter of really finding, as David was saying, Virginia lawyers to help sort of what we call like the Rosetta Stone of take the New York approach and map it, translate it to other states. And it certainly seems Virginia is not one of those states where it's like, oh, no, you can't do this. It's much more of it certainly appears that there are local powers, even though industry will tell you that you don't have those powers.
One of those people would be Greg Buford with the Southern Environmental Law.
There's a Richard.
I heard him say Cuccinelli got it wrong, and we absolutely do have the right to do this. So speak with him. He's aware.
Yes.
I had a question that would take a little different perspective here, especially with your work in New York. The Taylorsville Basin area is very agricultural. I'm wanting to know the experience with landowners in New York and what sort of reduction of property value occurs, what kind of damage is done to the agricultural land.
So we don't
Was that
have.
ever discussed?
So there is discussion about that.
Because there's a lot of farms in New York.
So in New York, there's sort of two sorts of farmers. Farmers that really want to farm and like farming and that see fracking as completely contrary and diametrically opposed to healthy and safe farming. Then there are people who are sick and tired of farming, can't make any money at it for reasons of our warped federal policies. So they don't want to be farmers anymore. Their kids don't want to be farmers. They want to retire. They look at this as their ticket to not have to be a farmer anymore and actually make some money. And so those people in New York have tended to be for fracking, some of these large landowners. When you look at Pennsylvania, there are tremendously negative impacts on farming animals and livestock. There's a book just came out by two other people we work with, and everyone seems to be located in it. We've got Tony and Graffy and Robert Howard. We have Sandra Seingraber, and then Michelle Bamberger and Robert Oswald just wrote this book about fracking and its effects on animals, and especially farm animals, and those have been devastating. For property values, they tend to, for those areas right around a leased property, so even if you're not leased but you're next door to a leased property, that and that tends to have a negative impact on property values. But we haven't successfully kept fracking out of New York so far. So all of the concerns have been theoretical. Although the FHA, that's the farmers, right? So they will not, their new policies, they will not issue mortgages on leased land. So if they know that it's leased, and they're sort of working, they announced that policy, not publicly, but in a letter to someone. And like, well, we don't know, like that is what we're doing, but we're not sure we want to fess up to that since our president is of the opposite mind. But there are, it is difficult. It's when you sign a lease, you're allowing commercial uses on your property, and that's not a standard risk. So it affects your ability to get insurance, mortgages, people who want to buy your property afterwards, people who want to buy, who don't want to live near that or anywhere around something like that. Yes.
I have a few different ones, and I'm not sure how many of them would be appropriate for you to address, so I'll just ask them. The first one is about forced pooling, if you had to deal with that in New York, and
It's worse
how that
here.
would play in, how it plays in Virginia. Do you want me to just stop and let you answer?
Yeah, I can answer that one.
Okay.
So, here in Virginia, from what I read, it looks
What
like.
is forced pooling?
So,
Oh, you don't want to know.
so forced pooling, called compulsory integration, where we are, is when a certain number of people, a percentage of people or of land has leased in an area where drillers want to drill, and they get some percentage, and then they can force everyone else to participate in that well. And basically, I'm not positive in Virginia, but I would imagine, my guess is it's the same as New York, that they cannot physically put the well on the non-leased people's property, but they can send their horizontal laterals underneath your property, explode the chemicals, leave the chemicals, and take the gas, and then give you some determined royalty on that after they deduct all their expenses. They have actually, in some places where they have done forced pooling, sent landowners bills.
They can rape your land.
And so, in New York, we were outraged that you have to have 60% of a unit leased, and then you can drag in the other 40%. It appears to be 25%, and you can drag in the 75% here in Virginia. Other way around, you have to have 75, and you can.
No, it's 25 to 75. The 75 got a worse deal. It doesn't apply to the tidewater area. I think that's only in the other parts of the state.
So, but it's 25%. So they have to get a very small percentage of people, and then they can just, without signing bonuses and just paying royalties, can drag all these other people in. But, so that's.
So did you have some strategies that you could use for that?
So,
You know,
well, especially if it's only 25%, that's hard, because the idea is to keep people from leasing, and so they don't get to 60, but they jury rig, they lie, they say they have 60, they don't. We believe, and I don't know what your statute looks like here in Virginia. In New York, they do not use a true eminent domain procedure. And in New York, you may only take property using eminent domain. There's no other way to take it. And so they have historically considered forced pooling to not require eminent domain, because you had the old style well, and the gas just naturally migrated. They didn't have to do anything to your property. They just applied negative pressure, and the gas went from your yard to their yard. That's not the case with horizontal fracking. They have to affirmatively drill into your property, inject all these chemicals into your property, leave 70 some odd percent of that behind with unknown impacts, and then they take the gas away. That is a physical trespass, a physical invasion of your property. That should require eminent domain proceedings and not one of these bogus oil and gas hearings that You know, in New York, they can do the compulsory integration hearing after they've drilled the well. They can go ahead and get a permit, drill the well, and then say, well, we'll figure out who we have to pay later. And that clearly seems to be unconstitutional. So there's probably, I think that most of those arguments about it being a physical trespass and requiring a true eminent domain procedure would apply anywhere in any state that didn't use eminent domain to conduct their force pooling in horizontal, in shale.
From an organizing strategy point of view, there should be an ability on the force pooling to bring in people who might not otherwise be natural allies to our group. Because I'm talking Tea Party people, anybody who cares about property rights.
Yeah.
Once we educate those people what this is about, most of those people get up in arms, even people who would be naturally supposed to be pro-drug.
Yeah.
Have any of these landowners that get pulled into this pool or forced into giving up their natural resources use, I think it's inverse condemnation claims against the county who allowed this to happen because it's devalued their property or taken resources from their property without an eminent domain taking?
So I haven't heard of that, but that's sort of the flip side of like challenging it as eminent domain or saying this should have been eminent domain. You didn't do that.
Damages because you increased the value of my property by either running chemicals through it or subsidence or whatever they've done or forced me to.
Just being there, what the Constitution says is you can't take public property or a private property for a public purpose unless you pay just compensation.
Right.
So the government's letting these people do this, whether it's you don't even need debt as far as devaluing the property. They're letting them put equipment on your property. They're leaving equipment there. You don't get paid for that. There's no just compensation. You may or may not get the equivalent of oil for the gas that's coming out, but there's no payment for them being on your property to begin with.
So do you think there would be a claim to get people together?
We think that's unconstitutional.
Yep. Would that be?
So
We
yeah,
know
so
that.
inverse condemnation is sort of the same. I mean, I don't know the precise Virginia version of inverse condemnation. What that is you didn't take my property, but you should have, and you have to because you have wrecked it and you've acted as if you didn't take it, but you really did, and so I'm going to sue you. Challenging it as an unconstitutional taking is sort of the same. I mean, they're effectively very similar, different names and perhaps somewhat different forums where you might bring those, or parties that you would sue in that, but same general, and that's all the same thinking. Yes.
Well, first off, let me thank you for your incredible work on this. And I wanted to ask you, can you talk a little bit about, it's something like 200 resolutions in New York. I bet a lot of those county commissioners or city councils were not on board from the get-go, right? So can you talk a little bit about, in general, how it is that this whole thing kind of happened and led to the legal challenges that you talked about?
So in New York, when we started, everyone said, there's nothing you can do. And then we thought about it for several months. We're like, well, we have an idea. We think we can do something. Our equivalent of the people in this room were like, that is the first good news I've ever heard about fracking. Like, I have been miserable and depressed and unable to get out of bed, and now there's something we could do. Yippee-yay. Turns out they didn't even really necessarily think we were right. They were just so happy to have an idea so every time we'd win a case, are you surprised you won? And we're like, no. Like, are you? Because you seem surprised. So even without firmly believing in it, just the idea of being able to do anything and reclaim some power got a lot of people really excited. So the next thing that they did, especially in the beginning, because nobody knew kind of how this was going to work, they spent a lot of time training, talking to each other about fracking, and developing very complex information sheets about fracking, and having one-pagers, on basically everything. and training people to go out and talk to their neighbors. And we don't have, and I have no idea if you do in Virginia or not, but in New York, we do not have any sort of initiative or referendum process. The only way you get a local law passed is by getting the local legislature to pass a law. You can't make them do anything. You can just not vote them back into office, but that's not very exciting for, you have to wait a long time for that. So what people did, though, was say, well, we're going to go out and collect signatures. Like, let's just see how people in our community react to this. Because they keep telling us we're a minority, we're just the vocal minority, most people want this, almost everyone wants it, you people just talk to yourselves and you make it seem like there's a lot of you, but you're wrong. So they were afraid maybe that was true. So they spent a lot of time developing these fact sheets, rehearsing scripts, getting up their guts to go knock on their neighbors' doors, which frightened pants off of people. Like, what do you mean I have to go talk to my neighbors? And they went out and people loved it. And they didn't have to, they barely handed out any of their, and this is in the first few towns, didn't really hand out a lot of their packets. People were just like, yes, I want to sign. And they had, and so these were not legally binding petitions, but the idea was to gauge the support in the community. And if there was widespread support, to be able to go back to the county commissioners and say, we went all over the county, we surveyed, we basically surveyed the populace, and they don't want this. So people tried to get, the goal was to get at least as many signatures as elected people to whatever the board was the last time around. So if it was a city and, 5,000 people got somebody elected, even though there's 30,000 people in the town, 10,000 people voted, half of that got you a seat on the board. If you could show people you basically had enough people on your side to not get them reelected, people that if they didn't do what you wanted would be unhappy. And so they were able to do that sort of across, almost everywhere where people have gone out and done petitioning, the response has been overwhelming. In the first town that did this, people in the town were actually so excited about signing this petition, which was just being run by 4 or 5 citizens in the group. They were calling the town hall pissed that they hadn't been asked to sign the petition and wanting to know why the town hadn't sent someone to their house yet. And the town clerk's like, this is not my job. Like, I have nothing to do with this. I don't know who these people are. Like, they are rogue agents. And so word of that first town doing this spread. Other towns wanted to do it. We held meetings. We showed people how to go out and do petition drives, these goals, like the number of people that got someone elected, getting the voting rolls, and basically mapping out. In New York, you can get the voting records, put it into a database, so you had people's names and addresses, and you sort of knew who the registered voters were. You could pick up people who weren't registered voters, but you sort of knew how many registered voters there were. You had it in your system, and then they basically it was like get out the vote kind of campaign where people had districts and little competitions between themselves to see who could get the most signatures on any given day, total, things like that. So that proved for many communities to be all that it took. There were a few communities that just did it, like the town board people. We have it at town level in New York. Those people were just like, no brainer, we want to do it. That was that might have been like 3 votes out of the 200. Most of them, so a fair majority of those, people went out, did this petitioning, came back to the town, sometimes again and again. People, if you go to many of your county board of supervisor meetings, I bet there are not a lot of people in the audience. And they're very accustomed to being able to do their business in private. And when you start having 50 people show up at every single meeting.
And videotape, and post it on YouTube.
And by having this pressure, they basically just wanted to get rid of these people. So they were like, fine, we'll have a public meeting, we'll have an informational session. And then you kind of got them fine, draft a law, like, we're not going to really enact it. Fine, draft one and we'll talk about it. And just this momentum of, and when they went out and petitioned, they would ask people, one of the refinements to petitioning was, how often can we call you? If we need you, will you come to one board meeting a month? And we'll, you can go to the first one, every month. Will you come out when we really need you? Like maybe you don't want to come out to many of these, but if there's one where we really need people, will you come to that meeting? Or should we never ever call you again? And so they would get people's emails and phone numbers and some level of interest so that they could keep turning people out of these meetings. And that has been elected officials have flat out told us, like, you're making it difficult for us to do our jobs. Like, we can't have you here watching us work. This is uncomfortable. And it's like, I don't know what you're doing, but I'm surprised that you don't want the public to watch. But they don't. So they really don't like having people sitting in these seats watching them. So that's the best thing you can do. And we found that really motivated town board members. There's then a smaller subset. We don't have every town in New York. There are some towns where the people are generally apathetic and haven't done anything. There are a much greater percentage of towns where the people have gone out and there's a wide popular support for these actions, and the town board members are just belligerent about not taking action. That, they're big landowners, they've signed leases, they want fracking. No way, no how are they ever gonna not allow this to happen in their town. And the sociology actually of these small towns and the dynamics of the newcomers and the old farmers, there's this real reluctance of people to challenge the old farming families that tend to control these town boards. And we have made and that's a much harder nut to crack, because those people are, well, so-and-so's my brother-in-law, or that's my kid's teacher, and this one, and so I don't want to not vote for them, I don't want to be mean to them. It's like, but they're going to frick. And,
Right.
but there's people, we're like, well, we can't be more upset than you are. Like, if you're okay with that, like, I'm not going to, come out and rabble rouse. But there have been times where people were convinced the board would not do anything. And basically enough people showed up with pitchforks and, torches that the town, literally, and we've had, people call us from town board meetings afraid, all right, can we tell them we called you and that we'll work with you because we need to, get these people to back off. And it's like, can I tell them? And so that is really, and people have thoroughly enjoyed going out and doing this petitioning. The people that did it have found it to be just tremendously great and something that they didn't expect and much easier than they thought. And really a lot of communities have sort of grown up around going to these meetings together and working on this together and working then on other things. And so, like in our county, again, we have all this anti-fractivist work. They talk about repowering the power plant. In the past, that would have taken months to get people ramped up and organized. We had a press conference the day after the announcement, and we just renamed one of our other groups to be an anti-repowering concerned ratepayers group, because we had all the people and a whole bunch of people. And so it's very useful for all sorts of, once you start seeing what happens at your county, you'll probably find a lot of things that you're like, oh shit, I don't like that either. So,
she speaks the truth.
So so that has been really, it took, once we got enough towns going, it then went from why should we do this, why should we listen to you, why do you even think that we have the right to do this, to why aren't you doing this? And there was this paradigm shift, despite the lawsuits from industry challenging towns that did this, despite there not being in New York any precedent that said you could do this. There wasn't any precedent that said you couldn't. But it really became, there was this paradigm shift, and people, I mean, you know how frustrated you are, and everyone's frustrated about a lot of things, to feel like you can go do something. And it's not like going to New York will be terrific and empowering, but this is like very local, like it's an easy ask. You know, it's not super easy, like you gotta go out and sit in some boring town board meeting in an uncomfortable chair for 2 hours. But it's easy to go to your town board and you can see results. It's not like writing a letters because in New Mexico they could not prohibit the industry, so they basically said, fine, you can go ahead and do it if you can prove it's safe. And came up with, so if you can show us health impact studies, if you can show us an emergency services plan, if you can show us that this isn't going to negatively impact our hospitals and our community, and if you can show us this is really no big deal, have at it. And they have not had any fracking in that county because they basically made it too expensive to Santa Fe, New Mexico. And another thing that counties have done to try to keep out fracking when it is sort of on the horizon, a few communities have gone out and done baseline water testing for the entire community. The community just did this in Pennsylvania, and they've done it in some other places, because one of the biggest problems is water contamination occurs. Industry has either done the baseline testing, they didn't look for any of the right things in the baseline testing. So part of the whole problem with water testing is you can't test for everything. So you test for specific things. So in Pennsylvania, for instance, when they go out and do these baseline testing, they don't do the baseline testing for anything that's, they don't test for BTEX and things. They do like a traditional water test, chloroform, those sorts of things. And then the DEP there, when they come in and then they do the post-test, they don't test for the right stuff either. And then they're like, oh, well, no problem. Well, you didn't look for the things that were the problems because that was expensive. So in these communities where people have gone out, got funding, and done widespread base level testing of entire communities and solid stand up and, court, good, testing, chain of custody, all that sort of thing. That's they know that they're well sleek. I mean, you can look at literature from the Society of Petroleum Engineers going back. They all talk about mitigating, blowouts and gas leakages and things like that. They know they have problems. So if there's all this baseline, body of baseline testing for a whole area, I wouldn't want to go there. So that's another way that communities have worked to try to keep them out.
We've got time for one more question, because we're going to do a little say goodbye and we can get the room out before the library closes. This is our last question.
Yes.
What about the model regulations? I think I know the answer to this question. The model regulations created by the Environmental Defense Fund.
Oh, they are not. I mean, it's like that's not a good example. But, I mean, you cannot, it's inherently unsafe. It's like trying to pass a law that there'll never be another car accident. Like, I could pass a law and say, look, I made a law, there's never going to be another car accident. It's illegal.
That's what the Virginia Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy is saying as well. Don't ever let them fool you that they think they're for the citizens and for the community and for the environment. They are in bed with the drilling organizations. You can question them yourself. I've got tons of literature on that.
What's the
It's
name?
current as of 6
Environmental
months ago.
Defense Fund, Bloomberg gave them millions of dollars with the purpose of coming up with, their instructions were to find that fracking was safe. And so they're instituting all these studies and at model well sites and coming up with these studies that are ultimately coming from a very pro-fracking agenda. They've shown that when a physician is given a pen from a pharmaceutical company, because that's a gift, he's more likely to prescribe that drug than he would have otherwise. And that was a pen. $6 million buys a lot of pens.
Thank you, Helen Slottje. I encourage you to stay and talk with each other if you've heard someone had something interesting to ask tonight.